The scorching desert sun beat down mercilessly as Marcus Wellington's $3 million Rolls-Royce sputtered to a halt on the isolated highway cutting through the Mojave Desert. For a man who had everything, penthouse apartments in Manhattan, a private jet, and enough wealth to buy small countries, this moment of helplessness felt like a cruel joke from the universe. His phone showed no signal, the air conditioning had died with the engine, and the nearest town was at least 40 miles away. Marcus loosened his silk tie, feeling sweat trickle down his spine, and for the first time in his carefully controlled life, he tasted genuine fear. What he didn't know was that this breakdown would become the most valuable moment of his entire existence, and that salvation would come from the most unexpected source, a homeless child who had every reason to walk past him but chose a different path instead. Marcus Wellington hadn't always been a millionaire, though you'd never know it from the way he carried himself now. Born into poverty in Detroit, he'd clawed his way up through the ranks of the tech industry with ruthless determination, eventually selling his software company for $200 million at age 42. But success had hardened him. Every business deal was a battle to be won, every relationship a transaction to be calculated. His ex-wife had left him 3 years ago, taking their daughter to Seattle, and he hadn't bothered to contest the custody arrangement. Business always came first. Now, at 45, Marcus measured his worth in stock portfolios and real estate holdings, surrounding himself with luxury while keeping people at arm's length. He was driving from Los Angeles to Las Vegas for another acquisition meeting, another company to absorb into his growing empire, when his prized vehicle, which he'd insisted on driving himself instead of using his usual chauffeur, betrayed him in the middle of nowhere. He stepped out of the car, the heat hitting him like a physical force. The highway stretched endlessly in both directions, shimmering with heat mirages. No other cars in sight. Marcus checked his phone again, still no signal. He hadn't packed water, hadn't thought to prepare for emergencies because emergencies happen to other people, not to Marcus Wellington. An hour passed, then two. The sun climbed higher, and Marcus felt his expensive suit becoming a torture device. His mouth felt like sandpaper. He tried to ration his saliva, remembering some survival show he'd half-watched while working on his laptop. Panic began to creep in at the edges of his consciousness. How long could a person survive without water in this heat? He'd read somewhere it was only a few hours in extreme conditions. That's when he saw her. At first, she was just a small figure in the distance, wavering in the heat like another mirage. But as she came closer, Marcus could make out details. A girl, no more than 12 years old, wearing clothes that had seen better days, carrying a worn backpack that seemed too large for her small frame. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her face, though young, carried a weariness that made Marcus uncomfortable in a way he couldn't quite name. "Mister, you okay?" Her voice was surprisingly steady, with a slight Spanish accent softening the edges of her words. Marcus straightened up, his pride reflexively kicking in despite his desperate situation. "My car broke down. I need to get to a phone, call for assistance." The girl studied him for a moment, her brown eyes taking in his expensive watch, his designer shoes, the luxury vehicle that cost more than most people earned in a decade. "No signal out here," she said matter-of-factly. "Won't get any until you're closer to town. That's about 40 miles east." 40 miles. Marcus felt his knees weaken. "I can't walk 40 miles in this heat." "No," the girl agreed, "you can't. Not without water." She swung her backpack around and pulled out a large plastic bottle, half full of water. "Here, drink some. Not too much at once, or you'll get sick." Marcus reached for the bottle with trembling hands, then hesitated. He looked at the girl's cracked lips, the dust on her clothes, the worn sneakers that had holes near the toes. "This is your water. I know where to get more," she said, pushing the bottle toward him. "You don't. Drink." He drank. The water was warm and tasted slightly of plastic, but it was the most glorious thing he'd ever experienced. He had to force himself to stop after a few gulps, remembering her warning. "Thank you," he managed. "What's your name?" "Rosa." "Rosa, I'm Marcus. I can pay you for the water, for your help." "I have money." "I can see that." There was no judgment in her voice, just observation. "Money doesn't help much out here, though." Marcus found himself studying her more carefully. Despite her shabby appearance, Rosa carried herself with a quiet dignity. Her backpack, though worn, was neatly organized. She wasn't dirty, just dusty from the road. Where are your parents, Rosa? Something flickered across her face. Grief, maybe, or resignation. Gone. My mom died 2 years ago. Cancer. My dad. He went back to Mexico after, couldn't afford to stay. I was supposed to go with him, but I wanted to finish school here. I stayed with my aunt for a while, but she had her own problems. Been managing on my own for 6 months now. You're homeless. The word felt crude coming out of his mouth. I prefer to think of it as, between houses. A small smile tugged at her lips. I sleep in different places. The shelter when I can get a spot, sometimes the church basement, sometimes under the overpass. I go to school most days. It's important to stay in school. I keep my grades up. My mom wanted me to go to college. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, a sensation so unfamiliar he almost didn't recognize it as shame. Here was a child, alone in the world, still clinging to hope and education while he, with all his resources, had become bitter and isolated by choice. Look, Rosa said, there's a rest stop about 10 miles back. I passed it this morning. They'll have water, phone service probably. I can walk with you partway, show you the direction, but I need to get to town before dark. 10 miles. Marcus looked down at his polished leather shoes, already feeling blisters forming from just standing in the heat. It's better than 40, Rosa pointed out practically. She pulled a candy bar from her backpack, broke it in half, and offered him a piece. Eat this. You need energy. As they started walking, Rosa talking to keep his mind off the heat and distance, Marcus learned her story in fragments. How her mother had worked 3 jobs to support them, how Rosa had promised her on her deathbed that she'd make something of herself. How she'd learned to survive on the streets by being smart, staying alert, and never losing her humanity. Don't you get scared? Marcus asked after she told him about sleeping under the stars when the shelters were full. Every night, Rosa admitted. But being scared doesn't change anything. You just have to keep going. My mom used to say that kindness is the only thing that multiplies when you give it away. Even when you have nothing else to give, you can still be kind. They walked in silence for a while. Marcus's feet were screaming, his suit was ruined, and every muscle in his body ached. But something else was happening too, a clarity he hadn't experienced in years was washing over him. He kept thinking about Rosa's words, about her half-eaten candy bar shared without hesitation, about the water bottle she'd given him even though she had nothing. When they finally reached the rest stop, a small, tired-looking building with 2 gas pumps and a convenience store, Marcus felt like he'd completed a marathon. Rosa helped him to a bench in the shade and bought him another bottle of water with coins from her pocket. You keep that, Marcus said, trying to give her $100 bill from his wallet. Please. You saved my life today. Rosa looked at the money with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. I didn't save your life for money, mister. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Because someone needed help. She pushed his hand back gently. But if you really want to do something good with that money, there's a shelter in town that feeds kids like me. They could use donations. It's called Hope House. After Rosa left, declining his offer of a ride, saying she had her own route to follow, Marcus sat in the air-conditioned rest stop waiting for his roadside assistance, thinking harder than he'd thought in years. He called his assistant and canceled the Vegas meeting. He called his lawyer and asked questions about foster care, adoption procedures, and charitable foundations. He called his ex-wife and actually listened when she talked about their daughter, making plans to visit Seattle the following week. But most importantly, 3 days later, Marcus walked into Hope House with a check large enough to run the facility for 5 years. He met with the director, toured the facility, saw the children who came through their doors with stories like Rosa's. He started volunteering, using his business skills to help them with operations and fundraising. He set up scholarship funds and housing programs. And he looked for Rosa. It took him 2 weeks to find her, living in a carefully hidden camp under a railway bridge with 3 other homeless teens she'd taken under her wing, sharing the little she had, making sure the younger ones got to school. When Marcus arrived, this time in jeans and a simple t-shirt, driving a modest sedan, Rosa looked surprised but not afraid. I've been thinking about what you said, Marcus told her. About kindness multiplying. I want to help, really help. I've set up a foundation, started working with Hope House and other shelters. But I also, Rosa, I have a big house with empty rooms. My daughter would love to meet you, she's not much older than you. I've already started the paperwork with family services. I'm not trying to replace your mother, and I know I've been a stranger to you. But if you're willing, I'd like to offer you a home. A real one, with your own room, stability, a chance to just be a kid again. Rosa stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus saw tears gathering in her eyes, the first sign of vulnerability she'd shown. Why, she whispered. Because you saved more than my life in that desert, Marcus said honestly. You reminded me what it means to be human. You showed me that the richest person isn't the one with the most money, but the one who gives the most freely. Everything I have, all my success, it means nothing if I'm not using it to make the world a little better, a little kinder. Rosa didn't answer right away. She looked at her friends, at the makeshift camp that had been home, at the vast sky above them. Then she looked back at Marcus and nodded slowly. Okay, but on one condition. These kids, Tony, Maria, and Sam, they need help too. We all stick together. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Of course she would think of others first. Then we'll help all of you. That's what the foundation is for. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Rosa took months to fully trust, to believe, that this stability was real and lasting. There were challenges, adjustments, and difficult conversations. But slowly, Marcus's house became a home again. His daughter Emma flew in from Seattle regularly, delighted to have a sister figure. Rosa's friends found safe placements through the Foundation's programs. Marcus scaled back his business pursuits to focus on charitable work, discovering a fulfillment that all his millions had never provided. 2 years later, Marcus stood in a high school auditorium watching Rosa graduate at the top of her class, her college acceptance letters already secured with full scholarships he'd quietly helped arrange. As she gave the valedictorian speech, talking about resilience, kindness, and second chances, Marcus felt tears streaming down his face, something the old Marcus Wellington would have considered a weakness. My mom used to tell me that we're all just walking each other home, Rosa said from the podium, her voice strong and clear. Sometimes we're the ones who need help, and sometimes we're the ones who can offer it. The important thing is to keep walking, keep caring, keep being human for each other. After the ceremony, as they celebrated with Emma and the growing community of people touched by their foundation's work, Marcus pulled Rosa aside. You know, he said, I spent my whole life thinking success meant accumulating wealth, winning every deal, coming out on top. But that day in the desert, when you shared your water and your candy bar, when you walked with me even though you had nothing to gain from it, that's when I finally understood what real wealth looks like. Rosa smiled, the wariness that had once shadowed her eyes replaced by hope and confidence. You saved my life too, you know. By letting me save yours first. And in that moment, Marcus understood the profound truth of her words. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone isn't our help, but the opportunity to help us. Sometimes being vulnerable enough to accept kindness is the bravest thing we can do. And sometimes, in the middle of a desert when we've lost everything we thought mattered, we find out what actually does. The sun was setting as they drove home together, the desert sky painting itself in shades of gold and crimson. Marcus glanced at Rosa in the passenger seat, headphones on, studying for her college entrance exams even on her graduation day, and he thought about how far they'd both traveled from that scorching day on the highway. A homeless girl with nothing had given everything. A millionaire with everything had discovered he had nothing. And in that exchange, in that moment of pure human connection, both their lives had changed forever, not because of money or status or power, but because of the simple, profound choice to see each other as human beings worthy of kindness. That's what Rosa's act in the desert had really given him, not just survival, but a reason to live, to love, to be more than the sum of his bank accounts. And that gift, Marcus knew, was truly priceless.